following breaking news at this hour. Good afternoon. I'm Michelle Marsh. Iran has launched 7 missiles against U.S. military sites, 6 of which were fired at bases in Qatar and another in Iraq. All missiles were intercepted with no reported damage or injuries. This is retaliation after the U.S. bombed some of Iran's nuclear facilities over the weekend. The attack came shortly after Qatar closed its airspace as a precaution. Just before the explosions, Iran's president wrote on social media, quote, "We neither initiated the war nor seeking it, but we will not leave invasion to the great Iran without answer." Joining me now is Alex Gangatano with The Hill. Thank you so much, Alex, for jumping on this breaking news. So Iran fired a limited attack. Was this mostly a symbolic attack, or is there anticipation that there may be more to come?
Right. At this point, it is looking like a more symbolic attack. As you mentioned, there has been no casualties of U.S. service members reported. There hasn't been much damage. The Qataris all had secured their airspace before this. And, at that rate, Iran knew that it had to respond or wanted to respond in some way to our strikes on their nuclear facilities on Saturday. And this is the way they chose to do so, as if that then leads to them saying now we'll return to the negotiating table. It's not clear, but this also is something that's easier for containment and easier for the Qataris to help us with containment versus them closing the Straits of Hormuz to that would shoot up crude oil prices and whatever else. So I think we were expecting this to be kind of their more smaller scale of retaliation efforts.
And do we think it was smaller scale because of the reasons you just outlined, not wanting to give an overwhelming response that would drive us deeper into this conflict? Or is it because simply that was what they had access to, given that they've been hit for so many days now? So that was the extent of their ability to fire back.
I think both is right. They have been diminished. At this rate, Israel has been successful in taking out a lot of course, their leadership and their capabilities. So this is the extent of it. They also know that if they did something more detrimental to the U.S. and its bases abroad, that the U.S. would respond in such a harsh way that they're aware of the U.S. capabilities, let's say. So I think at this rate, this was they thought was kind of a way to not have the U.S. retaliation to a certain degree that they're fearful of.
Now, you mentioned that Iran gave notice that this attack was coming. What did that allow the U.S. to do in terms of its personnel and resources?
Right. So because of this, the discussions really through intermediaries, one being Qatar, about something like this happening, it did allow for the airspace above the country to be blocked, closed down. Qatar then was able to intercept and then little personnel efforts like the U.S. Embassy in Qatar had civilians and whoever was working at the embassy shelter in place. So these were all precautions just to keep everybody on the ground safe. And the fact that also Iran is in these discussions with some of our allies and could reach us as a result makes just the fact that these aren't surprise efforts that the U.S. has the upper hand here at this point.
What has been the response from the White House so far?
Yeah, at this point, the president is actually still in the Situation Room. He was, going in at the time of this retaliation effort. Actually, they have said that they're closely monitoring the situation. Of course, that they're thinking that there's no casualties at this point. They're trying to figure out their options going forward. And like you and I have discussed, what message Iran was sending in this, and if that message is that they want to continue back to the negotiating table about access to nuclear weapons. So it is kind of a wait and see right now. And of course, there's always the question of, will we hear from the president directly after a situation like this?
Mm-hmm. This does give Iran, though, an off-ramp to diplomacy after they were able to respond in this way.
That's right. And that's the question that we've had for the White House for a couple of days is what is the option about diplomacy at this rate, and they've really tried to convey that they're hopeful that the Iranians will turn to diplomacy. But of course, in a situation like this wasn't turning towards diplomacy. So I'm sure there's a level of them trying to uh, see and talk to these countries that can get to Iran about if anything else is planned going forward.
All right, Alex Gangatano, thank you so much for jumping on with us to talk about this afternoon's breaking news.
Appreciate it. Thank you.